Hi, everyone. It's Charlene Lee. Apologies for getting started a little late. A few technical difficulties, mostly getting my slides up and going. So let's see. I want to make sure that we're working here. Let's see. Twitter isn't working. I'm looking according to my stream here. Okay. Hopefully it goes live. I'm not going to worry about that. All right. So today I'm going to be talking about how to write great prompts. And this is so important because what you put into a generative AI engine, and I'm going to concentrate primarily on ChatGPT today, but it applies to any of the large language models like Claude or Bard. Also applies to things like the image generation, so like DALL-E or Midjourney. All of these things start with a great prompt. And so I just want to share today some of the best practices that I've come across and that I use, and also how to use some of the technologies too to create great prompts. So a couple things here. I would love for you to share just how you go about creating your great prompts. Um, so I think in particular, how do you do? Let me just. This is going to bother me, so I'm just going to change it. How do you write great prompts? Because if you don't write great prompts, then you're going to again not have the greatest results. So let me get started into this. I have a few slides here to show today. Let me make this a bit bigger. So a couple things. First of all, great prompts actually provide great context because generative AI tools like ChatGPT have the entire knowledge of the world available to it. And you will get something that's fairly generalized if you just ask a general prompt. And so I think one of the things that you want to do is to make sure that you have as much context so that the engine focuses on one part of that entire vast pool of knowledge. And so that context then narrows down the options that the large language model will consider and give you the actual things that you want. So hold on for a second. I have money notes today. So the first thing you can do is just identify who do you want the AI to be. So you could say, I'm an executive with XYZ goals. You could be a third grade teacher. You could be a social media manager. Tell the AI, tell ChatGPT who you are. You are going to be this. So look at the world through that lens. Another thing you can do is to use tone. Are you an expert? Are you a kind teacher, empathetic teacher? Are you curious about things? So you can actually write the prompt with that tone and it'll emulate and discern from the prompt itself how to respond. So if you're more formal, you will be more formal in the response. If you're more playful, be more playful in the response. So these are ways to actually build it into the language, but you can also just say, you are this way, you're going to be a professional in the response. You can also, especially if you're using images or even tones, talk about it. Do you want it to be more cartoonish? Do you want to be bright sunlight? You want to be more mystical in terms of the approach? So those are, again, tone, both language-wise and image-wise, are ways to be more specific. You can then add text as background. Again, remember, there's a big, huge chat box there for you to put content in there. So, for example, I'll sometimes put in examples of my writing, emails. If I'm writing an email, I'll put in examples of my email. Like this is, hey, we're going to be writing some emails to some people, and these are sample emails of how I write, or sample articles of how I write. Or you can even upload your brand guidelines, like these are the tones to use, these are the specific words to use. So upload all those things, as long, again, be careful that you're not using proprietary information, you're sending it out there. And if you want to be extra safe, make sure you turn on the data privacy settings on ChatGPT, so it's not being used to train the model at a minimum. Direct the length of the response. Do you want something that's super long, super short? How many paragraphs? How many sentences? And then also, I really love this trick. Ask the AI to ask you questions for clarification. What else do you need to know to do this? So before I go much further into giving some examples of this, I want to see how people are actually great responses from people. So let's see, Jay Johnson, thank you for checking in. Jay Bryant, thank you for joining again from Rockford. And then Ida Mion says, would be interesting to learn from you what are disruptive prompts that you can make. We'll talk about that. And Jay has this best practice. I treat them like how I write photo captions that I've done for many, many years in 1 or 2 sentences. And then Jay says, and then I use personas as a follow-up. Again, personas, identity, to give the chat some context. Remember, it's a conversation. So you can put one thing in and then another thing in and then just do more and more information in there. Let's see, what else is in here? Eric has a great approach. I talk to AI as if it was my assistant. I give one clear goal at a time. I think that's a great way to approach it, Eric, because you can think of the ChatGPT as a really smart assistant. Again, has the world's knowledge at its fingertips, but doesn't know anything, has no context, has no experience. So you've got to lay it out for them in great detail. Like, you're going to be this, you have this, these are the constraints you have. Suzanne has a similar approach. I do my prompts in succession. It helps me to request a tone in one prompt, and keyword in another prompt, and main bullets in the next prompt. I also like to request an outline, and then when I'm finally happy, I will ask GPT to generate. I love that step-by-step approach. One thing to note, Suzanne, the engines are so good now that you can actually put multiple prompts into the same multiple steps like that into the same prompt. But I think I like what you're doing, because you're making sure that the AI is actually understanding you at each step, and you can test it along the way to make sure it understands you and then refine it. So I think that's great to give that. Let's see. Kevin has a question here. Do you have any experience in using active inference AI model to train? I'm trying to train my active inference model to use GPT and Wolfram Alpha to do some large scale things, and would love advice, integration tactics. Kevin, I have a little bit of experience doing this. I will talk about this in a future live stream, in particular, how to use the custom GPTs. Again, I think using active inference or fine tuning or other types of custom instructions are great ways to kind of embed those contexts and instructions deeply into the LLM and customize it. But today we're just going to use the examples for a general GPT, but they will also apply for the active inference examples that you're talking about. All right, let's keep going here. Let's see. Jonathan says, remember, GPT can also translate LinkedIn posts into other languages, for example, Japanese or Dutch, but always define the audience. For example, Japanese business community of semicon engineers. Jonathan, that is such a great point. As you are writing or translating, making sure that the AI understands who the audience is that you are writing to. So you are the writer, here's your audience, and what is that context? What do they need to hear? What are the biggest problems that they want to solve? So providing that context. All right, let's see. Jonathan also has another point here. One clear goal at a time, one clear goal. We'll talk about that in just a second. One thought per sentence. I use the style you find with news anchors. Again, just to be super clear with the AI about what it is that you want. So don't use jargon, don't use unclear language. Again, this is an assistant who doesn't know, who's super smart, has a lot of knowledge, but doesn't have any real experience and may not completely understand where you're coming from. And then Eric talks about the custom instructions. Again, once you do it, it really does feel like if you have your own Jarvis, like Iron Man did. So it pretty is, again, I'm going to go into some in a future live stream, how to do the custom instructions and custom GPT. The two are starting to merge together, and it's a really powerful tool. I've been playing with it with my own LLM and my own content. And I'll talk about how just really different that experience is. But today we're just going to do prompts. All right, because you can do a lot with just prompts just inside the chat box, inside of tools like ChatGPT and Claude and all the usual suspects. So let's go into this. Let's see. So I want to give an example. I was planning a trip. I'm not going on this trip now, but I was planning to go to Southeast Asia because I haven't been. And I figured December would be a nice slow time for me to go. And because most people, after the first week of December, they start doing holiday parties. That is not the case this year. I'm busy all the way up until basically Christmas weekend. And so I can't do this trip, but I was planning on doing the trip. So this is my planning prompt. It says you're a single woman, you're planning to go to Singapore. These are countries you want to go to. It doesn't have to include all these countries, but should be a mix of cultural highlights, spiritual destinations, nature highlights, and time on the beach. And also need internet access. So because I'm going to be doing work and vacationing. Choose the destinations. Again, the constraints, the criteria being good weather, not too hot, not too rainy. And very importantly, I ask it to say, before you create the itinerary, please ask any questions you need to gather more information to create the trip. So I'm having this conversation with ChatGPT, again, treating it like an assistant. And I'm pouring a lot of stuff into this. And the result that comes back, let me try to get to my slides here, is a whole bunch of questions. It has me for interest, preference, mobility, dietary restrictions, budget, work requirements, travel style, like how do I like to travel? Cultural interests, and previous travel experiences. What do they look like? So I answer all of those questions, and then it pulls out a great itinerary, which is a bummer because I'm not going there December, but I will be going in July and be looking at this again. So the result of this, and let me just put into here where the slides are, and also I'll put up a QR code so you can see it. But you can go to this QR code and get these slides, and also go to this URL. So the reason why I think it's so important to practice great prompts is, first of all, you will just get better results. I'll give you two more examples in just a second, one from Ethan Mollick and another using a technology called Prompt Perfect. That's a plugin. But I think it's really important to get really good at prompts because you get better results. So experimenting, practicing, and using some of these things in your everyday work with GPT, with all these AI engines, is a really good practice. And I also just want to plant this idea that your prompts actually become extremely valuable IP. This is the reason why it's so important as an organization to get good at doing prompts. Because the work that you do across the organization is the context of the business. So, training these engines to understand the context of your company and your strategic goals is extremely important. So, what are the right prompts to use? Again, just carefully using the publicly available platforms. How do you get the most out of them without having to build a customized engine, private LLM using all your content? How do you ensure that there's consistency and greatness in the way that you use these tools? And that is to treat your prompts as really unique intellectual property that you need to gather inside the organization. I know one group actually does a lot of this best practices, and they keep a Google Doc as sort of a wiki of great prompts. And they have examples in there. And so people can just copy and paste a lot of that context setting prompts to do the work. And again, it's all vetted, it's all cleared with the legal people. So this is what you can use. This is how to use it. Great instructions. But it's a consistent way, especially if you want to have a consistent voice and tone, to make sure that the tools are using it in the right way. So this applies not just to ChatGPT, but to some of the other things like copy.ai or jasper.ai that some companies are using to create marketing copy, making sure that you have these enhanced prompts, these prompts saved as IP becomes extremely important. All right, I have a couple other let's see, the questions here. Can I provide the URL for Prompt Perfect? I don't, it's actually a plugin. I'll show you just an example in just a second. All right. So question from Eric's, is the best way to register prompts as IP at the Copyright Office? I have a couple in there in process at this time. That's a great question. I don't know if you can actually copyright prompts because they're not technically published out there. So copyright law, again, this is more IP in terms of a unique information that you use inside the organization as company information. So you think about the practices, the policies, the processes that you use that are unique to the organization becomes highly proprietary and very unique to the organization. So I think IP is intellectual property, maybe not in the way of copyright, so to speak, but in terms of intellectual property, information that you keep inside the company and uniqueness that if it was outside could cause significant damage or decrease your competitive advantage. So it needs to be protected and used and treated like important property that's intellectually driven that you want to use and treat with great care. So that's what I'm talking about. Let's see, I'm going to come back to some other these other questions. I want to get through the rest of this content because it's really fun and juicy. So I'm going to go through and talk about structured prompts. So this is from a great post from Ethan Malik, who just has a great. Let me hide this banner for a second so you can see the URL. I don't have all of it in a banner that I can put up here, but if you just go Google Ethan Malik great prompts, you'll see this URL. But he talks about just conversational prompts like the one I just did, and more structured prompts. And this is again my prompt is a bit more structured in that you have roles and goals again to constrain the universe, step-by-step instructions. You have some expertise or pedagogy. Again, a point of view of how the world works. So a process or a framework. There are constraints that you put in. And then also personalization that you can customize it for every user. And the example he gives, this is really hard to see in some ways. So hopefully you can blow it up on your computer. But he built this little engine that could be a coach to a team about how to do pre-mortems. So before you do a project, how do you anticipate all the things that go wrong? And he's identified in the prompt the places where he's defining the role and the goal, the step-by-step instructions, the pedagogy. So he says, go and look at the work done by these people. The constraints, like don't give people the answer, direct them. Don't tell these students how to do a pre-mortem, but ask them questions that can get them to that place because you're a coach. You're not the person giving the answer. And then personalize the results based on each student's needs and the prompts that they put in. And you can actually go and see the actual structured prompt output at this URL. But it's, again, I think a really interesting example of how he dissected his prompt into these 5 different areas and made that really clear. So I think, again, this is a very structured way to do a prompt and very helpful. So Jonathan has a great point here. The content is not unique, but the context may be, absolutely. So it's not IP necessarily in terms of the content, but it's the context that you understand. And there's a context if you're using it as an organization or for yourself. That's really helpful. All right, so I want to go and talk about the prompt perfect because prompt perfect because this is a really helpful tool. If you just don't feel like putting the effort into all of this, you can also do this little thing called prompt perfect. And so I'll give you an example of how to actually, I'm going to skip forward and just give you an idea of what it can actually do. All right, so here is an example of a prompt. So I just went, create a generative AI policy, and it comes out with a pretty generic thing. It's not even complete. So it's just not that helpful. But if I go and actually use a Prompt Perfect, which is a plugin inside of ChatGPT, to activate it, I put in a prefix of perfect, and then I put in the same prompt, create a generative AI policy. And it's a little hard to read, so I'll read what it actually created as a prompt. Develop an extensively detailed, well organized, and comprehensive policy that outlines the guidelines and regulations for the usage of generative AI technology. This policy should cover every aspect of implementation and utilizing generative AI, including its ethical considerations, potential risks, etc. Please provide a thorough and precise response, ensuring that all essential elements are addressed to guarantee a high quality and comprehensive generative AI use policy. So, what Prompt Perfect did was understand my really basic prompt, create a generative AI use policy, and made this really long prompt along the lines of what Ethan Mollick and I were talking about to provide more context, to give the engine more structure, constrain it, say high quality, these different types of things. So, I find it to be really helpful when I just don't have the energy to go and write a really structured prompt. I just use Prompt Perfect. So let me give you an idea of what that looked like. So this is the response. Again, a little hard to read, but it goes through. It says developing a comprehensive policy involves several key components. Here's a structured approach to creating such a policy. So introduction and purpose, definitions, ethical considerations. So it just goes through and lays out all those different processes and questions you have to answer. So this is a very different response using Prompt Perfect than what you would normally get if you just put in the other things. So let me just give you a quick idea of how to actually do this. So inside of ChatGPT, because it's not intuitive how to use plugins, you go into settings in ChatGPT and you enable plugins. So this is a very important step. If you haven't done this, I love using the plugins because it's another way of putting a constraint or an additional tool, additional information into ChatGPT. So, for example, I use the trips.com or Expedia or Kayak plugins to do trip planning because they have real time information, whereas ChatGPT doesn't when I'm planning trips, for example. So once you enable your plugins, then you can go into ChatGPT. This is the little dongle at the top. You usually have it selected to 4 or 3, but you can now choose plugins. And then from there, you can go into, I'm sorry, this is such a detailed thing, but I think it's helpful, into the plugin store, which is at the bottom there. You can see I already have some of the other plugins here already, but just go into the plugin store and you'll see that if you search for just prompt, you'll find Prompt Perfect. You can install it. You can say, I already have it installed. And then go back to that drop-down menu on the ChatGPT page. Make sure you check off that box called Prompt Perfect, and then you're off to the races. Again, I think it's such a helpful tool to use plugins, but especially that plugin has been one of the most helpful tools that I have seen in terms of my day-to-day use. So let's see, I have a couple questions here. All right, so from Mark, prompts, learn by doing. That's such great advice. It's completely replaced all of my Googling and forced me to iterate my prompts to understand how best to communicate with chatbots. Use GPT-4, Hugging Face, Claude, Bing Chat, all of it. Yes, Bing Chat is pretty amazing for getting better Google results without ads and sponsors. I think I so agree with you, Mark. I love Bing Search, and actually I like Bing Search sometimes even better than ChatGPT, depending on what I'm doing. Let's see. Bill Friend says, this approach is common practice in Coda with Coda AI. It allows users to abstract the need for generic prompts into comprehensive prompting inputs. It's the realm of data-driven prompts. It's also the place, the inferencing closer to your data, whereas GPT will never be fully intimate with your data. And that is true, Bill, because the difference here is if you have something that is trained on your data, of course it's going to be better. But I think in the meantime, for the vast majority of people, we just don't have access to that, being able to train it, create the vector databases and everything else. So Coda AI is allowing to do more of that. Good point. I need to dig a little bit deeper into what Coda AI does. So I'll check into that, Bill. Thank you for that. But I think, again, the practice, as Mark was saying, of using these prompts and doing it on a regular basis, because it does take practice. It is part science and a lot of art, because unless you can get to the place where you can actually do this fairly well, you're just going to be sort of just learning still. So there is a bit of a learning curve. But again, I think tools like Prompt Perfect are great because you can put in your prompt, see how it improves it, and learn from Prompt Perfect how to write better prompts. Kate has a great question. Hi, Kate. Good to see you. Is there a point at which you find you need to reset the engine, for example, get a clean slate and start the AI over? This is the pain about generative AI. It doesn't have memory. So it has memory inside of the chat. But after a long conversation, it starts losing track of what's going on. So at some point, you do have to reset it, especially if you're trying to do a new task, a new goal. So it understands the role, but it's hard for it to forget the old goal and set a new one. So I reset it. I do a new chat every time, which is why that Google Doc with all of my prompts is such an asset because I can just copy and paste. So depending on whether I'm writing content or if I'm doing research, or I'm trying to summarize something, I have different prompts. And then especially based on my audience, I'll have custom prompts that I put into that too as well. So the prompts are as complex or as simple as you want to make it, but just understand that the more information you put in, the more context you can give to the AI, the better the results will be. All right. So let's see. I think that's what I have for today. Just a couple last points that I want to make. It's so important to experiment. You heard that from people like Mark. I'll say it again and again. The only way you're going to get better at doing these prompts is by practicing it. And you may have seen my live stream a few weeks ago. And I keep surveying the audiences I speak to, and usually between 10 and 20% of the audience is actively using ChatGPT on a regular basis and using it to get their work done. And I think the more you do that, the more you're going to experiment with the prompts and the more it's going to impact the way you do work. It's this beautiful upward cycle of greatness that you fall into when you start using prompts in a thoughtful, strategic way. So, experiment is my first thing. Make sure you're saving a lot of those most frequently used context things. And then, third of all, as your organization does this, capture your great prompts and be able to use them as an organization to set the right context together. All right, so that's what I have for today. Let's see. I have next week a really fun announcement. I will be talking more about my upcoming book on generative AI. We're at the point now where we're comfortable revealing what the name of it is, what the focus is, what we're going to be covering in it. And I also give you some ways to help participate in the book. Participating in taking a survey, for example, if you meet certain criteria of organizational size. But we are using a really cool AI interviewing tool to actually conduct the survey. So I'll give you a little bit of insight into what that looks like. And then also there'll be a way to actually help sign up, get early review copies of the book to get your feedback. So lots of exciting things. We're definitely using generative AI in interesting ways to write the book, to create the book, and we'll be excited to share more and more of that with you. And just another quick update. I am now actively speaking on this topic. So if you know of opportunities for me to share this knowledge that you have been enjoying with new audiences, please get in touch with me. I would love to be able to take this content to more people. And so actively looking for opportunities to just get out to audiences and to share some of this thinking. And again, it's a great way for me to learn and to enhance the research and bring it back into things like this live stream. All right. Thank you all for dealing with my technical difficulties today. And good luck with the prompting. And I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.